Welcome back to our project management workshop series. Today we're going to talk about why projects fail. So there are 7 major reasons that we've identified across dozens of organizational projects that cause projects to fail. And by fail, we mean either they never get completed, they get completed without the intended results, they get completed way, way, way over budget, or they get completed way, way, way past the timeline, or all of the above, right? And so these 7 reasons I'm going to kind of rapid fire at you real quick. We will come back and talk about each one with a little bit more detail. But first, just to get the 7 out there: resource constraints, lack of proper prep, lack of granularity, too ambitious, not properly tied to business outcomes, scope creep, and lack of budget. So, as I dive into these, let's start with resource constraints. What do I mean by this? This one is pretty simple. One of the most common things that we see across many organizations and many different industries is leaders who decide that you want to do something like implement a new ERP or implement a new loan origination system or implement a new telephony system. They suddenly expect the people who run the impacted groups to and already have a 40-hour a week job to magically be able to take on a bulk large scale effort like this, be a major contributor to that effort, and still perform in their 40-hour a week day job. And it just doesn't work like that, right? Like, there is not enough resources that one individual who's like a director of operations has to continue to effectively be a director of operations and then also spend 20, 30 hours a week, which is what they probably need to be spending to have success on a major ERP implementation, right? And you could recycle that statement across many positions for many different types of system implementations. But the reality is that people have day jobs, and most of the time, as opposed to bringing in the necessary help, shifting priorities, shifting people around, organizations do not line up resources appropriately. They just expect people to work more and do it. The problem is that most of those people are already working 40 plus hours a week. There's only so many more hours they have to give. And a lot of these are 12 to 18 month projects, right? We're not talking about a 1 month sprint. A lot of these are relatively long. And it's just really difficult to do. So those types of resourcing constraints, one of the biggest reasons that we see why projects fail. Number 2, lack of proper prep. What do I mean by this? Well, I'll give you a real world example. We worked in the last couple of years with an organization on a new ERP implementation, and they had already selected the ERP, hired the implementation team. We were working on kind of from a project management process documentation side. On the client side, they had a ERP implementation team from the ERP system, right? And as they got into the actual conversations, one of the activities, if you're implementing an ERP system or converting to a new one, is you have to take your products table and your customers table from whatever your existing systems are, map them, and load them into the new ERP, right? And they realized at that point, mind you, after getting into contract, after setting deadlines, after setting their schedule, after like executing contracts with 3 or 4 different vendors to help on this execution, that they didn't have a customers table and they didn't have a products table. They had never gone through the process of defining those things. And so they suddenly realized, after already committing and executing on these contracts, that a lot of the prep work that they probably needed to do to be prepared to do an ERP implementation was not done. Just like that, their timeline got extended by 6 months, right? So by not doing your research and understanding what the prerequisites that you're going to need to have in place to be successful in the system, and then doing those first, you are setting yourself up for major delays and failures of some sort when you get into the actual execution of the project. So that's number 2. Number 3, lack of granularity. So what I mean by that is pretty simple. Systems are really, in a very simple form, just tables and workflows, right? That's what they are. And I know we're talking about system implementations. There are other types of projects, but you could do like building a new building, implementing a new machine on the shop floor. A lot of the different types of projects that you have out there, you have to get in the weeds to be successful. You have to have a few key people who are willing to get into the granularity of what you are talking about in order to set it up correctly, right? If a system is a series of tables and workflows, then you need somebody who actually understands every data field in those tables and every step in those workflows and how that compares to how your business wants to do work in order to get the workflows correct, right? So a lot of times you have people leadership level who don't want to get into that level of granularity, and that's fine. But there has to be a handful of people who do get to that level of granularity and can carry that responsibility for the organization. If they can't do that, then you will not have success. The project manager is one of the most effective people to get into that level. A lot of project managers might tell you that's not really their job, and that's probably true. But if you have a good PM who will get into the granularity, because they're kind of the guiding hand of all of these efforts, that helps them be really, really effective on a project. So that's number 3. Number 4, they're too ambitious. We talked about the resource constraints, so let's say that that's true. You're asking a bunch of people who have day jobs to contribute, and then you set a really ambitious time frame, right? And then this ties in with number 7, which is a lack of budget, right? So I'll talk about these two at the same time. A lot of times what you see is companies who want to do it fast, but they don't want to spend a bunch of money on extra labor and capacity to do it. And so they set these ambitious timelines. They have resource constraints with their internal staff, and then they don't want to contribute enough budget to it. All 3 of those things are a combination for a disaster, right? It costs more money to go faster. I shouldn't have to say that, but apparently I do. It costs more money to go faster. If you want to move faster, you need more resources. You have to spend more money. That's how it goes, right? So if you have a lack of budget, which is our number 7 reason for failure, and you have too ambitious timelines, which is our number 4 reason for failure, those two often go together. It's like the same persona who thinks that you're going to do it 25% faster on 60% of the budget. That's a recipe for failure, and it'll end up being more expensive and take longer because you're starting off from a place where you never were going to have success in the first place, and those resource constraints, those are going to hop into, right? So our number 4 reason for failure is too ambitious. Our number 7, lack of budget. You're not willing to commit the necessary, and I'm not talking about like technology licensing stuff. That should all be known up front. I'm talking about horsepower, capacity, people, skills. It takes a lot of them to do these system implementations effectively. It still does, even in the emerging age of AI. Maybe that will change in the next couple of years. It probably will. But right now, it still takes a lot of horsepower, a lot of capacity from people, and not having enough budget for that is our number 7 reason for failure. Doubling back to number 5, it's not properly tied into business needs, right? So there are 2 pieces here. One, your objectives must be focused on the specific business outcomes that you're trying to drive. There's no other reason that you should be doing a major project unless you're trying to drive very specific business outcomes. If you start down the path of implementing a new system or buying a new machine or whatever it is, and you can't answer the question, what specific business outcomes are we trying to achieve? Stop, don't do it until you can answer that question, right? So that's number 1, the lack of clarity on objectives. And then the other side of that coin is communication. Projects that fail feel like black box IT initiatives that everyone kind of hears about, but nobody's involved in and nobody knows what's happening. And then suddenly they roll out and they're asking you to change how you do things 12 months later, 16 months later, and you know nothing about what went on in that process, right? That's a failed project, or that's the recipe for a failed project. A good project constantly engages the business with communication, with a feedback loop, letting them test things, letting them provide their input so that the business always knows what's happening, what's going on, where are we. Nothing is a surprise, and they get to feel engaged so that they feel like they get to provide their input so that when it comes time to roll it out, this helps with the change management piece a lot too. But when it comes time to roll it out under that context, now you know that the business feels comfortable with where you are. They're not going to be surprised, right? So failure reason number 5, not properly tied into business needs. This means lack of clear objectives, but also the communication piece. We're not having that feedback loop with the business throughout the project. You do not want it to feel like a black box IT initiative. And failure reason number 6, which will be our last one because we already touched on number 7, is scope creep. This doesn't have to be bad. Sometimes there are clearly logical reasons that you should change the scope of a project, and it totally makes sense for the business, and that's totally fine. You just have to understand, as we've talked about in past videos, that you set your budget and you set your schedule based off of the original scope. So if you change it, you have to adjust the other 2 as well. But one of the biggest problems is that there's this unofficial type of scope creep that happens in projects where these little things that don't seem like a big deal keep getting added here and there and there and there. Sometimes this is the fault of bad scoping up front, right? So that could be where you go wrong here. Sometimes they're just people asking for things, but that scope creep that happens incrementally. Like instead of one big change in the scope, it's a dozen small things that don't seem like a big deal on their own, but when you add them, they kill weeks of time and money, and suddenly you're behind on budget and you're behind on your timeline because your scope kind of by surprise expanded from what you originally set out, right? That's our number 6 reason for failure. Do a quick recap. The reasons why projects fail: resource constraints, lack of proper prep, lack of granularity, they're too ambitious, they're not properly tied to business needs, scope creep, and a lack of budget. Um, like I said, obviously there are others, but these are the biggest, most frequent reasons that projects fail inside of organizations.